Hey, good morning, and thank you for joining. We will be starting the session in just a few moments. We'll wait for few more attendees to join. Hey, good morning, and thank you for your patience. Welcome to the session Introduction to AWS EC2. Suvarna Jadhav, working with Cloud.in as a strategic partnership and alliance manager. Before starting the session, I would like to mention a few points. All attendees are muted by default and cannot unmute during the session. We will have a question and answer session at the end of the presentation. If in case you have questions in between the session, please raise your hand to grab speaker's attention or ask questions through question and answer section. We are honored to have Mr. Venkatesh as a speaker for this session. Venkatesh is an experienced specialist with demonstrated history of working in the information technology and services industry. He is skilled in cloud technologies such as AWS and Microsoft Azure. Additionally, Venkatesh is YouTuber, Udemy instructor, and has published a course on AWS migration on Udemy online learning platform. Welcome, Venkatesh. Over to you.
Thank you, Suvarna. Hey, hello everyone. Good morning. A warm welcome to today's session. So first of all, thank you everyone for making your time here today to learn something new. Right. So I'll get started directly to the point. Today we're going to talk about very important and widely used service in cloud industry, specifically with AWS. Right. It is going to be Elastic Compute Cloud, or in short, it is called EC2. I hope my presentation is visible.
Yes, Venkatesh, it's visible.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Okay, so a quick look at the agenda, what we are going to learn today in the next 1 hour or so, right? So we'll start with what is called as a global infrastructure, something that is very important. If you are very new to the cloud and you have to understand how AWS sets up its own infrastructure so that it can support its customer. Then we'll jump on to overview of what an EC2 is. We'll try to understand simplistic architecture of Elastic Compute Cloud. And then what is that you can do under a free tier. So AWS offers a 12 months free tier for a beginners to get started, or for any companies to get started, right? So what is that you can do in a free tier specifically for EC2, right? And then we will look at the key components, and then how you can set up your EC2 and how you can connect to your EC2 machine. Right? And we'll also see a demo of how you can launch your first EC2 instance under your free tier account, and then how you can connect to that EC2 machine. Okay. And then finally, we'll have Q&A session. You can ask your questions, and then I'll be glad to clarify the questions you have. All right. So let's get started. Okay. So first and foremost, the global infrastructure. Right. So what a global infrastructure is, how is AWS offering its customer the services, right? So we have to understand few critical points here: the data center, availability zone, and the AWS regions. Data center is something that where you have lots and lots of servers, and then an availability zone is actually a collection of these data centers, right? So when I say an availability zone from an AWS perspective, what it means is Amazon has built up a lot of data centers. They own a lot of data centers, right? And then these data centers are interconnected, right? All these data centers, for example, on the screen here, you see 4 data centers. So usually it is more than 2 data centers that are grouped together, and we call them as availability zone. Okay. The reason they have this is to provide you with a better availability of your services, right? And then you have something called AWS region. A region is geographical location, right? In India, AWS has 2 regions. One is Mumbai, and the other one is recently they have opened, which is Hyderabad. I think it was November 2022 where it was released to the public. So likewise, throughout the globe, they have multiple regions. Okay, so throughout the globe, at this moment, they have around 31 regions in total throughout the globe, and then within these regions, they have multiple availability zones. And what an availability zone is, again, it's a group of data centers. Okay, try to remember this because we're going to use this when we do a demo of it, right? We're going to launch our EC2 instance in one particular region. So that means when I launch in a one particular region, I'm just starting my EC2 instance at that particular location. Okay, so what you see on your screen is the regions across the globe, right? Okay, so you have the US region, and then the Asia Pacific region, the European region, right? So they're broadly categorized to three or four different regions, but again, each has its own availability zones and then the data centers. Okay, so moving on, let's actually look at what an EC2 is, right? So EC2, or Elastic Compute Cloud, is these are nothing but your virtual machine. consider it probably your laptop, right? Your laptop is your actual physical machine, right? Your actual physical hardware. You have it in front of you, and you can install an operating system. You can install some application on top of your laptop. The same way, EC2 is actually a virtual machine that is running in cloud. Okay, and we call these as instance, right? And AWS offers this as a web service. So when I say web service, what it means is that you can actually access this EC2 or Elastic Compute Cloud on the web, right? You can connect to your machine using the internet. So that's what it is, a web service. And it also provides resizable compute capacity. So what it means is, let's say you have a laptop and currently you are using a 8 GB memory or the RAM, and then probably 500 GB hard disk, right? So you can always increase your laptop capacity, right? You can probably plug in a 16 GB RAM at a later point, provided your hardware supports it, and then probably add in additional 500 GB of SSD or HDD, right? The same way in the cloud as well, right? This EC2 service also provides you with a facility that, let's say I have a virtual machine, which is my EC2, and then it is with a certain RAM, probably the same way, right? 8 GB and then probably 50 GB of hard disk or maybe 500 GB of hard disk. So I can always resize it. I can increase it to 16 GB. I can go to 32, even 128 GB of RAM, right? That is something that I can do it with a click of a button, right? Earlier days, this was very complicated process to increase your RAM of a physical hardware or virtual machine. It was very, very complex process. But now with the cloud, these are all facilities that is something available with a click of a button, right? So to understand EC2, right, you have to understand what is called as EC2 host, right? So there is a difference between EC2 host and EC2 instance, right? The EC2 host are the hardware or the infrastructure that AWS is managing. So most of the time we don't have access to this. This is completely managed by AWS. And the AWS also provides you with an option where you can even control some of the features within this hardware. That is where you have to opt for something called a dedicated host. But that's going to cost you more. But when you are going to use a shared host, which is here, okay, the shared host when you're using, that means I can launch my EC2 instance, okay, and this underlying hardware is going to be shared between multiple customers. For example, this is the EC2 instance I am using. Then there is another person launches another EC2 instance. That is irrespective. When he is nowhere related to me, he is nowhere related to my AWS account. There is another customer altogether. He launches his EC2 instance. There is a possibility that both of these EC2 instances are on the same hardware, which is your EC2 host. Okay, so that's the difference. Okay, so why do we need these EC2 instances? Obviously, like I was saying, right, to resize your instances at the enterprise level is going to be a very complex process. Okay, so you don't have to worry about that, right? Cloud makes it very easy. AWS makes it very easy. You don't have to invest in all this hardware. Okay, hardware is invested by AWS. All you have to worry about is what kind of operating system you want, what kind of application you want to run on top of your EC2 instance, and all this happening at a click of a button. All right. So with free tier, we get around 750 hours per month. Okay. We'll talk about that in the upcoming slides. Okay. So now let's look at the architecture of it. So very, very simple architecture. I want you to make take a snapshot of it. When I said take a snapshot, it doesn't have to be on your mobile, but try to capture this image with your eyes and then keep it in your mind. Okay. Because this is something that we are going to use during our demonstration. So a typical architecture is something like this. So this is my EC2 instance, okay, or this is my AWS account, right? So in order to launch my EC2 instance, I need an AWS account, okay, and then I'm going to select a particular region where I want to launch my EC2 instance, right? It can be in Mumbai, Hyderabad, or US East one as Northern Virginia, right? I can be launching it in any of the European regions. So now within this region, I have something called availability zone, right? So we talked about availability zone, right? This is nothing but the group of data centers, right? So within this availability, I'm going to launch my EC2 instance. Okay, so there's some key components here. So when I launch my EC2 instance here, I'm going to attach a security group here. So this security group is responsible for letting users to connect to this EC2 instance, right? So I'm going to define some kind of a rules or a protocols here that tells me that only an user, okay, only this particular user can connect to my EC2 instance, or which users can connect to my instances. Okay, I'm going to define certain rules here. Okay, and we are going to connect it via the internet. Okay, and in order to connect to this EC2 machine, right, so as an user, I should be allowed to bypass the security group. So consider these as the virtual firewall, right? So I have to bypass the security group, and then I need to have something called a key pair, right? I need to have something called a private key pair, like a private key, okay, and then my security group should be allowing me to connect to my EC2 instance. right? So whenever I launch an EC2 instance, it comes with a default root volume. So this is something like, whenever you build your new laptop, right, you have something called a C drive, right? That we call it as a root volume, right? It can be, it's the same for your Linux instances, right? So consider this as your C drive, right? This is like your, your virtual machine or your laptop with Windows operating system, and it has a C drive, right? Moving on, let's look at the free tier options, right? So whenever you create your AWS account, if you're a beginner and you are learning, right, you always get a 12-month free to use AWS services. Again, free doesn't mean that you can use all the services, but there is certain limitations, right? If you go to this website here, I'll share these links at the end of this presentation, right? And you will have different services. What is that AWS offers under free tier, right? For example, if I have EC2, right? If I'm going to launch an EC2 machine or the virtual server in the cloud, what is that I get with a free tier? So what Amazon says is you get 750 hours of usage. But again, when I say 750 hours, it is not for any kind of EC2 instance, right? They also say that 750 hours per month of Linux, RHEL or SUSE Linux of T2 Micro, right? And it also includes your Windows machine, right? Okay. Again, you can even launch a Mac instances under AWS Cloud, but these are typically not covered under free tier, right? You can launch Linux-based instances or a Windows-based instances, and they have to be either a T2 Micro or a T3 Micro. We call this as an instance type, right? So these are eligible for your free tier. There's again another class called T4G small. We'll talk about that in the upcoming slide. That is also eligible for free tier. Okay, so if I have to do a simple calculations here, right? So let's say I have my AWS account. I have started learning my AWS, and then I launch my T2 micro instance. Okay, and then I just leave it on, right? I never stop that instance, and I'm running it for entire month. So your billing happens first of every month. Okay, and then this resets, right? Every month you get, see, if you see here, this is per month, right? So after the first of every month, you get that hours gets reset. So again, you are eligible for another 750 hours. Okay, this is a time-based calculation. So for example, if I had to see this, right, a simple calculation, if I run one T2 micro instance throughout the day for all the 30 days, so the total calculation will be around 720 hours. That means I will still be charged zero. There won't be any charge for me with my billing. But if I have two EC2 instances, right, two T2 micro instance, obviously I'm going to use the usage per hour. I mean, the hours usage will be double what this is, right, which is 1440 hours. So what it means is your first 750 hours are free. So whatever is left after that is, which is 690 hours, is what you are going to get charged. Again, the charge is not very high. It is very, very minimal. For a T2 micro instance, if you see here, if you do a rough calculation, that costs you around $8 a month, or that's around 660 rupees per month. Okay. Again, remember, you only charge for your running instances. Okay. The moment you stop your EC2 instance, then this hours, right, this clock will stop, right? Let's say I have started my EC2 instance. After 4 hours, I stop that EC2 instances, right? That means my cap is stopped at 4 hours. Okay. Similarly, but if you have another instance, that time hour is still running. Okay, and you are not charged for the stop time. Okay, but again, you have to be very careful whenever you are starting with cloud, right? Each and every service has its own pricing. For example, here we talked about EC2 instance, right? EC2 instance has an EBS volume attached, right? So the charges for your EC2 instance are separate. The charges for your EBS volume, right? This is we call elastic block store. Okay, we talked about that C drive, right? So that the charges for this volume will also differ. Okay, again, under free tier, okay, under free tier, you get a 30 GB of block storage. That means I can assign my C drive as 30 GB, right? Until at that 30 GB storage, I am allowed to use my free tier account. Anything that goes beyond 30 GB is when I start getting charged for this. Okay, so these are some of the free tier EC2 instances that you can use with your free tier account, right? So the T2 micro, very, very widely used by the beginners or someone who's new to the cloud, is something that they start with T2 micro, and it offers you with 1 GB RAM and one virtual CPU. Okay, and then post that, this is what the charges are. So similarly, you can even use T3 micro. It comes with the 2 virtual CPU, and recently Amazon has announced another T instance family, which is T4G small. Okay, this comes with a 2 CPU and 2 GB RAM, but this is allowed until 31st of December. You can use this. Again, it is not necessary that this instance is available in all the regions. So we talked about the region, right? So there may be certain regions where it is available, there may be certain regions where it is not available, right? But if you're using that particular region, you can even go for a T4G small with 2 CPU and 2 GB RAM, and this is still available until 31st of December. Okay, so some of the key components, right? If say I have to launch my EC2 instance, I need to understand some of the key components of it. Let's look at it, right? So there is something called Amazon Machine Image, or we call it a AMI in short. So AMI is a template that contains the software configuration information. So consider it more like your operating system CD, right? So if you are built any of the Windows machine or a Linux machine, right? You used to have that operating system CD, right? You had in the olden days you had that CD, but now most of the things are being done by a pen drive. But even the pen drive has that image, right? So install your Windows machine, you have a image, right? This is something like that, right? It has an operating system, or you can even embed some of the application on top of your operating system and then have your AMI created, right? So that's an AMI, right? A simple example would be your Windows operating system or the Linux operating system image. And then we need to know what kind of instance type. So we talked about T2 micro, right? So that is one of the instance type, right? So what is instance type? So instance type basically determines the hardware of the host computer. What kind of hardware you want to use, what kind of CPU you want, how much memory you want. You want 8 GB memory, you want 16 GB memory, you want 32 GB memory, right? What kind of storage you want for your C drive. You want elastic block store, EBS, or you want to go with an non-persistent instance store volume, right? And what kind of data transfer capacity you want, the Ethernet card, right? How much data transfer you want to have on your EC2 machine, right? So some of the example here, the most popularly used T2 micro for beginners, and then you also have some larger instances. They are categorized into M category, or the memory based, the compute based, we call it a C category, right? They're different. I will give you a link to go through each of different classes at the end of the presentation. Okay, and then you should know what is a security group. We talked about that. So it's basically a virtual firewall where we define the protocols or the rules that says that, okay, Venkatesh is allowed to log into this EC2 instance machine. Okay, there's a Rahul who is allowed to log into this EC2 machine, right? Something like that. And then the storage, what you want to connect to your EC2, whether you want to go with persistent storage called EBS or the elastic block store, or the non-persistent instance store. Okay, and then there is optional user data, which is widely used again. You want to run a particular script at the launch of your instances, you can also do that. Okay, now we understand what are the components, right? And now if I have a free tier account and I want to launch my EC2 instance, right? I want to set up my first EC2 instance. What is that I should require, right? First and foremost, obviously, I need to have a AWS account. So when you sign up for a AWS account, again, you get that 12 months free tier AWS account, right? And then you would need something called a key pair, right? This key pair will authenticate you, right? It will help you to authenticate that, okay, I am allowed to connect to this machine, right? But having a key pair is not just enough. You should also have a security group or the policy or the rule that is allowing, right? Your virtual firewall that should allow, that says that, okay, Venkatesh is allowed to log into my EC2 instance, right? These are the three important things that you should be aware. Okay, so remember this, because we're going to create these key pairs. We're going to configure this security group when we do our demo. All right, so okay, now let's say I have set up my EC2 instance, and how do I connect to that machine, right? So very popular for a Linux machine, you use an SSH, right? You SSH into your machine, your Linux machine, and if it is a Windows, you are going to do a remote desktop session or RDP session, right? So AWS offers various way you can connect to your Windows or the Linux based operating system, right? Some of the very popularly used for Windows, you can use RDP. Okay, just do a remote desktop, and then using your EC2 instances hostname or the IP address, you can connect to that machine. Okay, there's also inbuilt mechanism to connect. There is we have something called a session manager or a fleet manager that you can use to connect your Windows machine. Right? Similarly, for Linux, again, there are various ways you can connect. And in today's demo, we're going to cover two popular. One is Git Bash, and then I'm going to use MobiX term to connect to my EC2 instances. Right? Okay, and there again, there's a putty which is again widely used, but my personal is I would not recommend it, because there have been some complications where the beginners have struggled a lot trying to use putty. They're not able to change the key pair or trying to modify the permission. So the easiest way would be either use a Git Bash or a MobiX term, which we're going to see in the demo. Right? There's also a session manager which requires a little bit of additional configuration to have that to connect via session manager or the fleet manager. All right, so there are a couple of other methods that is also can be used. Okay, so with that, I would like to take you to the demo of launching our first EC2 instance and then how we can connect to that, right? Okay, so I logged into my AWS console. So when you log in, you see wizard, something like that. Okay, the widget. This is something that I have recently used, or the services that I have used. And there is a couple of other widgets. Talks about AWS Health, and then what is the cost that I'll be charged for the end of this month. Okay, these are again configurable. You can add, remove, and then probably move around into different something like that, right? That is fine. Okay, now we are interested in EC2, right? So if I have to search for an EC2 instance service, I can either click on this service tab over here, okay, and then look for compute, and then I have EC2, right? This is one way. Or there is a search bar over here. I can just go here and then type EC2. Okay, this will take me to the service, EC2 service, and if you just click on a star mark here, it gets bookmarked over in this screen, right? So you want to bookmark regular services, you can do that. It gets bookmarked here. Okay, I'll go to this EC2 here. Okay, so this is my EC2 instance dashboard. It talks about how many instances are currently running. I have 0 instance that is currently running, and then what is the total number of instance in my particular region, which is again 0. We talked about key pairs. So currently I have 2 key pairs, and then we talked about security groups. I have around 11 security group, right? And the rest of things I don't really have any snapshot or any of the EBS volumes or anything like that, right? Okay, and then we talked about regions, right? So here, if you see here, you have on the top right hand side of your screen, you see the regions here, right? So this is your US region. So you have Northern Virginia, which is US East 1, and then Ohio, US East 2. Similarly, we have, when you come to Asia Pacific region, we have Mumbai, Hyderabad, and then Singapore, Sydney, Tokyo, and others. So wherever you want to launch it. So we talked about that regions and availability zone and data centers, right? So this is where, right? So if I'm going with this particular region, US East 1, and then I launch an EC2 instance here. So that means I am actually launching this EC2 instance somewhere in Northern Virginia, right? And the instance I launch in Northern Virginia are independent of the instance that I launch in another region, right? You have to be very careful where you are launching your EC2 instance. Okay. Normally, we select this region based on your customer requirement, right? Let's say I have a customer who's based out of India, right? So I would obviously be selecting a region closer to my Indian customer, right? So his business is entirely based out of India. So that means I'll be either choosing Mumbai or Hyderabad, right? If I have a customer who is in US based or probably European based, right? So I'm going to choose a region which is from Europe, right? Which is closer to a customer location. There are other criteria where you have to make a choice which region you want to do, right? Depending on that, we are going to select that particular region. For today's demo, let's say I'm going to select Mumbai. Okay, so that means I'm going to launch an EC2 instance. I'm going to launch a virtual machine in a data center somewhere that is in Mumbai, right? We don't know where that is, but it is in Mumbai. Okay. So if I go to this screen, the screen looks similar, but the content of it, right? If you see the Northern Virginia, I had 2 key pairs and around 11 security group, but in Mumbai, I have 1 key pair and 2 security groups. Obviously, you can create more and more key pairs and more security groups as per your requirement. Okay. Now, on this screen, what you see on the left hand side is all about your EC2 instance, what all options it offers. For a time constraint, we'll not be able to talk about everything, but we'll try to keep it short and we'll try to cover what is the important aspects of it. Right? Okay, you can go through this all different options over here. Now, if I have to launch my first EC2 instance, right, I have a couple of options here. Either there's an option called launch instance button here. I can choose this. Okay. Or I can just select an instance over here, or I can select instances over here. Okay. It all takes me to the same screen. Okay, I go to here and then I have an option to launch an instance. So this screen shows what all instances are currently running or in stop. Right now, I don't have any instances in this particular region, right? In Mumbai, I don't have any instances. Okay, so now I can either launch from again here or I can use this button. Okay, I'll use this button. Okay, so we talked about the key components, right? That's what we're going to see here. Okay, so I want to launch an EC2 instance, and I want to call this my demo Linux. Right? I'm trying to launch a Linux-based instances. Okay, then we talked about AMI, right? Software configuration. So I have multiple options to select the AMIs. If you see here, I have an Amazon-based Linux machine. I can launch an Ubuntu machine. I can launch Red Hat-based Linux machine. I also have Windows, right? These are very popularly used. That's why you see a thumbnail over here. Or you want to have any specific requirement, you can browse for more AMIs here, right? So you have more and more, you have even the MAC, right? But this is not something that is free tier eligible, right? For example, you see a tag here, right? So this particular AMI, if I'm going to launch an EC2 instance using this AMI, this is eligible under free tier. But if I launch this AMI, then that is going to be charged, right? These are not eligible under free tier. So you have to be very careful what AMI you are going to select. Okay. So similarly, for example, if I select this one, okay, there is a Red Hat version of this that I can go, which is eligible for free tier. But whereas this AMI, okay, this is not available under free tier. Okay, so make sure that you are selecting an AMI which is tagged for free tier. Okay, when you're starting your journey to AWS or starting to launch your first EC2 instance. Okay, so I'm going to go with this Amazon Linux. Okay, so that's what it is populated here, and here also it says it is free tier eligible, right? So whatever we saw on the other screen, right? These are the same stuffs what you see here in the drop down button. Okay, so make sure you're selecting the right one. Okay, so before that, let's do one thing, right? So we talked about the key pace and the security group, right? So let's have our prerequisite completed and then come back to launching these EC2 instances. I can also do that on the same screen, but let's have a prerequisite done and then come back to this screen, right? Okay, I'll go back to instances again, okay, on the dashboard. So first thing we talked about, right? We need a key pair and a security group. Okay, I click on a key pair here. I can click here, or if I scroll down on the left side, I also have the same options here, key pair and security groups. Okay, either should be fine. Okay, so there is one key pair that is already created, but for today's demo, let's create a new key pair, right? So this is a one-time key pair that you can use for any number of EC2 instances that you are going to create. Okay, just click on a create key pair. Let's name that key pair as demo. Okay, I'm using this in Mumbai. Let's call this KP, right? KP is for key pair. Okay, you can name anything that is more friendly for you. Okay, and then I have an option to select the key pair type, right? So RSA is something that I can use that key pair to connect to my Linux based instances as well as Windows based instances. If I select an ED25519, so with this keeper, I will be able to connect only to my Linux based instance. Okay, this type of keeper will not allow me to connect to my Windows instances. So for now, I'll go with an RSA, and then you have option to either select a PPK file that you can use with PuTTY or a PEM based key file that you can use with other SSH clients, right? I'm going with PEM based SSH key. I feel it's more friendly and more user friendly, and then I can use it, lot better way to connect, right? I'll go with an RSA and PEM, and then there is an optional tags that you can use, and then let's say create keeper. Okay, the moment you create your keeper, this is the one we have created, and then there's a file that gets downloaded, right? We talked about the private key, right? So this is the private key that you would require to connect to your EC2 instances. Okay, so be sure that you store this in some secure location and not to lose this key file, or do not share it with anybody else. So this is very, very important. Okay, so I have this keeper downloaded here. Okay, fine, I'll have it here. Okay, now we are done with the key pair. Now let's go to the second requirement, which is my security group, right? I need to define a security group that allows to connect. I click on a security group here. Again, I have a couple of security groups here. Let me create a new security group. Okay, go here and then click on security group. Let's name that. Let's say this is demo. I'm going to use the security group for SSH connection, also possibly to connect to my Windows connection, right? SSH and RDP. You can add some description. This is again optional. Okay, to SSH and RDP to my instances. All right, and then you have option to select the VPC. So VPC is a virtual private cloud. Consider it like your own network, right? Your private network where you are going to launch your EC2 instances, right? So by default, it has selected the default VPC. Okay, if you have multiple VPCs in your particular region of particular account, then you have option to select. Okay, if you're a beginner, this is the only VPC available, or if I delete this, it shows me the multiple VPC is what I have. By default, you will have one VPC, which is your default VPC. Okay, I'm going to go with that. Now, this is important, right? The inbound rules. The inbound rules is something that tells you who is allowed to connect to my EC2 instance, right? Now, let's define these inbound rules. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on add rule. Okay, so here you can select what type of packets you want to send, right? I want to do an SSH to my Linux based machine, or I want to do an RDP to my Windows based machine. Right? So there are some pre-configured details that is available. You can choose. For example, I have SSH. I'll select SSH. So it automatically selects the port that is required for SSH. And then you have the source. So who is supposed to connect, right? I can just click on a drop-down button. Okay. If I select anywhere IPv4, okay, let's see what happens. So it is coming out with all the IPs, right? Anybody in the world. can connect to my EC2 machine, provided they have the key pair. Okay, this is very, very risky, very, very dangerous. You don't want to do this, right? Never ever do this, even while you are practicing, right? So what I'm going to do is, instead of allowing everybody to connect to my EC2 instance, what I'm going to do, I'm going to select only my IP, right? I'll select my IP here, which populates my current public IP, right? This is the IP address of my laptop, the one I am currently using. Okay, so if I want someone else also to do it, I need to know their IP. For example, if somebody in the class want to connect to my EC2 instance, they need to have my key pair, and then I have to allow their IP address. So you have to tell me what is the IP address of your laptop, and then I can basically add, right? How do I add that? I can again go to the same one. I say SSH. So instead of selling my IP, I'm going to say custom, and then let's say I'll add something, right? 192.168.2.3/32. Let's say this is IP address of one of the participants in the class, right? And they want to connect, so I have to allow them, right? I have to allow them. So this is what I'm going to select. Okay. Okay. This is something that you can define. Okay. For now, okay, SSH is fine. Let's say I have a Windows instance and I want to connect to that. I can even define the same rule over here. The RDP again, it select automatic the port. I'll say I should be able to connect from my IP. Okay, the description is optional. You can fill it so that people know that what is this for, right? SSH from, let's say, Venkatesh PC or laptop, right? Then this is RDP from, right? So that helps, because in a real time these are going to be very, very long, and there may be 10 rules, 15 rules in the same security group. So it is important to identify why you're adding that rule. So the description helps you. Right? Okay, fine. So I have added SSH rule and RDP rule to the same security group. And then the outbound rule, let's not worry about it. I'll just go with the default for now. Okay, again, the tags are optional. I'll just leave it for now and then create a security group. All right, so my security group is created. If I go back to the security group console, if I see, this is the newly created security group. Okay, so this one I have here. All right, now let me go back to EC2 dashboard. Okay, so I'll do a refresh over here. Okay, so I have one additional key pair and one additional security group. So I have my prerequisite done. Now let me go back to my instances, launch my instances. Let's select this demo Linux. I'll select this Amazon Linux as my AMI. Okay, I'm going to go with T2 micro because this is a free tier eligible. If I go further down here, I have different classes, right? So see, for example, if I go to T32X large, it offers me 8 virtual CPU and 32 GB RAM, right? Similarly, I have a lot of other classes, let's say. Okay, if I go for M410X large, so it offers me 160 GB of RAM, right? This is RAM, not your storage, but this is RAM. And it offers you with a 40 virtual CPU, right? So the various classes that is available. So based depending on your requirement, okay, you are going to select this instance. For our demo purpose, I'm going to go with T2 micro, which is free tier eligible. Okay. Okay, I've selected this, and then we have to select a key pair, right? So we have created a key pair. Let's see if we can see that. Yes, so I can see my key pair that I have created. So I'll select this key pair. Okay, so under the network settings, so we have already the default VPC, which is the only VPC currently available. If this is not something, that you can always edit it over here. Okay, and then on the screen, I can again create a security group, or I can select an existing security group. Okay, go here. Okay, so this is the security group we just created. I will select this. Okay, and then the storage, right? For a Linux, I think 8 GB is sufficient for your root volume. If it is a Windows based machine, then minimum that you would require 30 GB, right? So I'll go with the default configuration, and there are some additional information we talked about, right? So the user data, and there are some things that for now let's not worry about this, just leave it for now. Okay, so now here on the right hand side, if you see, it's a summary of what you have selected. Okay, you have selected Linux based, Amazon based Linux instances, and you're going with the T2 micro, and this is your security group, and this is your storage. Okay, all done, and I'll say click launch instance. Okay, now my launch is successful. Okay, there's no problem. So it is successfully launched. I can just click on this. It will take me to that instance. So whenever an EC2 instance is launched, there's a unique identifier called instance ID, I hyphen, there's some name. Okay, this is my EC2 instance. I can just click on this. It will take me to that EC2 instance, or I can go back to my instances here. So this is the instance that gets launched, right? If you see here, okay, this is the instance, and then currently it is in run instance. That means the instance has started. Okay, but it is the status check. If you see, it is currently initializing. that means it is performing some boot operation and it is waiting to be available. So you just have to wait for a few seconds to have the status checks completed. So what it does is, if you want to check further more, you can go to status checks here. Okay, there are two status checks it performs. One is system status check, and then the other one is instance status check. So we talked about EC2 host and EC2 instance, right? The system status checks is something to deal with your EC2 host, the hardware which AWS manages, and then the instance status checks is your EC2 instance, right? The one that you just launched. Wait for a few seconds to get this completed, and then we'll be able to connect. Okay, while this boots up, let's do one thing. Let's launch another Windows machine as well, right? The same way, very simple. I will click on launch instance here. Okay, let's say this is demo-windows. So here I will select Windows operating system. Again, I have to make sure that it is free tier eligible. Okay, this is fine. Okay, I'm going with the T2 micro. This is also again free tier eligible. Key pair, I'm going to select what we created. Security group, because I have allowed RDP as well, so I'm going to select the same security group. If you see the storage here, right? For Windows, obviously you need minimum of 30 GB. There's no way you can reduce it. So I'm going with the default option, right? And then launch my instance. Very simple, right? So if you have the prerequisite, it's just a click of a button, you can launch your instance. I'll go back to my instance. I should see the second instance that is being launched, right? So now I have two instances. One is Windows and one is Linux. So if you see for a Linux based, it says that, okay, two of the two checks have passed. That means my virtual machine is up and running fine. Now I want to connect to that, right? The simplest method is select this EC2 instance over here, okay, and then click on the connect button here. Click on connect. Okay, it offers you different ways of connecting, either to EC2 connect, the session manager, and then again I told you, right, there is a small configuration that you have to do to use a session manager, but otherwise the simplest is the SSH client. Okay, this is what we're going to use. Okay, so if you go to SSH client, it gives you an information, like, okay, what is that you are supposed to do. It says open your SSH client, locate your private key file. Okay, fine. Okay, where my key file that is downloaded, right, I have that here. This is the key file that I have downloaded. Okay, I have that. And then it says run this command if necessary to ensure a key is not publicly viewable. Okay, fine. Okay, now we looked at the different options, right? So I'm going to use something called a JIT bash. Okay, you can download it from here. If you go to JIT, if you go for a JIT, okay, so you have to install this JIT on your laptop. Okay, when you install this JIT, make sure you are selecting that JIT bash as well in your option, so that install your JIT bash, the easiest way, right? The other way one is your MOBA exterm. Okay, look for MOBA exterm, and then there is a free version that is available. You go to downloads. Okay, this free version you can probably use it, right? You can download this and then use it. I'll show you how to connect via mobile exterm as well. Okay, the other way is your JIT bash, right? Download this software and install it, right? Okay, now back to this, right? So what it says, I had to run this particular command, right? So I have my key file here. I will open a JIT bash in the console here directly. Okay, I'll just right click on my Windows laptop and then let's say show more option. I have an option on my console here, open JIT bash here. Right, just click on this. If you don't get that option, you can always search for a JIT bash in your laptop and then go to a path, right? So just make sure you're in the path where your key file is located, right? My key file is located in the downloads and Firefox downloads. So this is where my current path is, right? If I do a PWD, it gives me a path where I am in, and then if I do a LS, it gives me the key pair, right? That means I am in a right path where my key pair is available, right? Okay, I'm in a right path. Now what I will do is I'll go to the documentation. Okay, it says to run this command, right? So I'll just copy this, just click on these small square boxes here. Okay, the command is copied. I'll come back to JIT bash, paste it. Okay, press enter. Okay, it made it changes to the file permission. That is fine. Then it says connect to your EC2 instance using public DNS. I can use a public DNS, okay, or I can use a public IP. Either of them should work. When I say public IP, what it means is, okay, this is my public IP, right? When I go to that particular instance, I have this public IP and there is also a private IP. Okay, so either I can use this IP to connect to my EC2 instance, or I can use the DNS name, right? The public DNS. This is the public DNS what I have. I can use this to connect. Okay, so I'll just copy this. They are given the example. I'll just copy this. Okay, with my key pair already provided. Go back to my JIT bash. Again, right click, paste it. Mean largest. Okay. Press enter. Okay, it's asking for authentication. I'll say yes. Okay, now if you see, I am currently logged into my EC2 machine, right? I'm inside my EC2 machine, and this has a IP address 172.31.37.200, which is your private IP address. It displays a private IP address. If I go back to this instance, if you see here, this is my private address, right? 172.31.37.200. Okay, I'm connected here. I can run any commands over here. df-h, which tells me what is the file system I have. For example, we use that root volume as 8 GB, right? This is what it is, right? So this is my 8 GB volume. I can obviously add additional volumes as and when I require, right? We talked about that resizable virtual capacity, right? I can also do that. Okay, this should be the easiest way, simplest way to connect to your EC2 machine. Okay, let's look at the another way to connect, right? So this is fine. I'll just minimize this. So another simplest way is, okay, I was telling about this mobile X term, right? You can download this software, have it downloaded and installed. So I'll open that software. Okay, so this is my mobile X term console. Okay, now I have to do a SSH session, right? So what I will do is, on the left hand side, you have something called session. Click session. I want to do an SSH. Click SSH. Okay, what is the remote host name, right? So remote host name, I'm going to use public IP of my EC2 instance. Okay, I need to know the public IP address of my EC2 instance. So I'll just copy this public IP. Okay, I can either use public IP or the public DNS. Either should work. Okay, do not use private IP because you will not be allowed to connect to your EC2 instance using a private IP from the internet, right? We are connecting from the internet, then always use a public IP. Okay, what is the username? Specific username that AWS offers by default to certain AMI. So for a Linux based AMI, we have a username called EC2-user. This is the default. Okay, and then now I have to specify the key pair, right? I have to specify a key pair somewhere that I need to connect to. So that option you have here. You click on advanced SSH settings. Okay, now it says use private key file, right? I'll check mark on this, and then I'll get an option to select that key pair. I'll just click on this, and then it takes me to this download folder. Okay, this is the right key pair. Make sure you're selecting the right key pair. Select that and say open. Okay, so this is done. Okay, I have selected the right key pair, and then I say okay. Okay, I'll accept that. Okay, now if you say I'm just connected to this machine. Okay, the same one. If I do df-h, I see that 8 GB volume which we selected is already available, and I'm locked in. Now let's see a quick demo on our Windows instance. Let's see what happened to our Windows instance. So even the Windows instance has passed two of the two, right? So normally when you launch a Windows instance, it takes a bit more time than your Linux instance to come up to boot. Okay, so here again I have option to connect. I'll select my Windows instance, connect. I want to use RDP, right? I can download that RDP file, or I can do an RDP on my public IP. Either should be fine, right? What I'll do for simplicity. Okay, I need to know the password of this, right? I need to know what is the password for the default username. Like we use EC2-user for Linux. So default username for Windows is administrator, and I need to know the password. So how do I get a password? Is from my key pair. I'll say get password. I'll click on a get password, and it says here, okay, this is the key pair that is associated with my Windows instance. All right. And then it says that upload your private key file. Okay, fine. I will click on this, and then let me go back to this path where I have my key pair. Okay, I'll select the key pair. It has uploaded key pair, and I'll say decrypt the password. Okay, now I have got the password, right? So I'll copy this. Okay, now let me put the password over here. Now I have option to download this remote desktop file. I'll just download this file. I have the RDP file downloaded. I'll just double click on this RDP file. Say connect. Now it's asking for the password, right? I have copied the password in my clipboard. I'll just going to paste it here and then say okay. I'll say yes. Okay, it should take a couple of seconds, and then you should have your Windows instance now ready. So let's give it a few more seconds to boot up and be ready for our user configuration. Okay, just like any other Windows server, it gets booted up and then ready for usage. The same way, you have your C drive, right? We go to my computer. because this comes with that 1 GB RAM, right? So that's why it's kind of slow. So we have used that GB Elastic Block Store or EBS. So that is your root volume, right? We talked about that root volume. That is this. I can even have additional volumes if I require, right? So here it talks about what is my server, right? So it's a T2 micro based instance. It has 1 GB RAM and what is the IP address. All the details you will get it over here. All right. So one last thing, specifically if you're new to the cloud and if you are practicing cloud, make sure that once your activity is completed, so once you are done with your demo or once you're done with your practice, always stop your EC2 instances. So that way you don't get charged, right? Like we talked about that free tier options, right? You are charged only when your instance is in running state, right? Whenever it is in running state, that is when you are charged. Okay. So if I don't want to incur a charges, what I can do is I can select this and then let's say instance state, go to instance state, and then I can stop this instance. Okay, if I am no longer using it, I don't require this Linux instance, then I can always terminate this instance. So when I say terminate, that means it is gone forever. There is no way that you can recover it unless you're taking a backup of that machine. There are ways to take a backup of your machine, but if you don't have any backup, there's no way that you can get it back. This terminate is kind of taking away your EC2 instance. When you say stop, let's say I'm going to stop this instance, it goes to stop mode. You can always start it back again the next day when you start practicing something on your Linux machine. And if I don't want, let's say my certain activity or my certain lab is completed and I don't want to incur additional charges, right? So if I go here and then I can directly terminate this instance. I don't want this. Let's say I can terminate these instances. So this one got into a stop mode. Okay, this is fine. And this one currently it is shutting down and then it gets into terminated, right? So this is something that I can again go back and then start my instance. But the moment I have terminated this, there's no way that I will get a start option here. All right, so that's about the demo. So some of the links here, I will share it across, then we'll open up for Q&A.
Venkatesh, there is one question from Shweta. She is asking, are there any charges for adding services to security groups?
Very good question. Like I was saying, each and everything that you use in AWS is chargeable, but there are certain items that are not chargeable. One of the example is security group. You can create any number of security. By default, there is a limit that the number of security group that you can create in a region. There is a certain limit, don't have the exact number, but you can also increase that number. Let's say tomorrow you have increased that limitation. For example, let's say I have 20 security groups that I've already created and I need more. By default, there is a limitation, but you can talk to the AWS customer care and tell them that I need additional quota to increase my security. They will allow it. And at the same time, the rules that you add to your security group, right? For example, let me go to the security group here. So we created this, right? I can always go back to the security group and edit it. Right? I can always add more rules. There is no charge for this. There's no charge to creating a security group. There is no charge to adding these rules to the security group. But there is a limit how much you can add and how many security groups you can create. And that can also be increased after talking to AWS customer care. But one more thing, remember, I have used the public IP here, right? So the moment I restart my laptop, I have used my laptop IP. The moment I restart my laptop, my public IP is going to change. So the next time when you're trying to connect to the same EC2 instance, you have used this IP in your security group. So come back to your security group, see what is your IP, what is the IP of your laptop, and then make sure you're modifying this security group account. Otherwise, it says that, okay, you're not allowed to connect. Okay, it's an interesting thing to troubleshoot once you start learning AWS or the EC2 instances. Yeah.
Thanks, Venkatesh. The second question is from Pratik. He's asking, what is IOPS and how to choose EBS with suitable IOPS?
Good question again. IOPS is your input or output per second, right? Let's say you have application, you have a database application that you want to run on top of your EC2 instance, right? So we talked about the instance types here, right? So let me show you this. So there are different EC2 instances that offers different IOPS. Okay, for example, if you want to run your database based application, right? So obviously you need a higher input and output operation. So for database based operations, you have something called a memory optimized instances that offers your higher IOPS. Okay, so you have an application of that sort. So rather than going with your T2 micro or M4, you can go with a memory optimized, which offers you a better IOPS. So that is where you can choose your instance type. And then again, you have the EBS volume that you can select. Okay, again, on EBS, you have general purpose and then you have IO optimized EBS volumes that you can also select. right? So depending on your application, you will have that option to select your type of EC2 instance, also the type of EBS block store. So the choice completely depends on what is your application and what kind of instance type you want to add in. Okay, I hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Venkatesh. The next question is from Dinesh. He's asking how to take Linux GUI SSH.
Okay, so you want to connect to a GUI-based Linux machine, right? If I understand it correctly. So connection is, again, if you want to connect to an SSH, you can use any of the SSH tools like the mobile XTerm, Putty, but if you want to use a GUI based, again, there are certain AMIs that offers Linux based. Let's see, where is that? Okay. You want to use a GUI based Linux machine, again, you'll have to, the choice depends on your AMIs here. Okay, you have to select an AMI that offers your GUI based Linux. Okay, then you can connect, and then just like how you connect your Linux machine, right, or the Ubuntu machine with a GUI, you can use that. But I doubt that they are available under free tier. It may not be available, but again, you'll have to search for that. I hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Venkatesh. Next question is from Arindam. He mentioned my free tier is expiring. Can I continue using the AWS after expiration?
Okay, so you can continue using your account. Right? You can continue using your AWS account, but your free tier is going to expire. So that means none of the free tier eligible services are going to be free for you. The moment your 12 months of usage is done, the next moment, even when you select your T2 micro, so it has certain charges, right? We talked about that in the session, right? So there's going to be certain charges for your T2 micro as well, and then even that 30 GB of EBS storage is not free for you. So whenever you launch even a T2 micro with 8 GB of EBS storage, you will still be charged for it. But you can definitely use your account going forward, but you are going to be charged for every service that you're going to use. But you can always create another free tier account if you want to practice it, right? You can always create another free tier account. I am going to send you a link again. Let me see if I can paste all the links here. I'm trying to put it in the chat window. Hopefully you should be able to see it. Yeah. So there's a video around how to create a free tier account. There is links around what is that you can do from a free tier, all that detail. Okay, go to the next question.
Sure. The next question is from Dinesh. It's not related to session, but he's asking in general that how someone can take cloud job roles as a fresher graduate.
Okay, as a fresher, depends on your knowledge with cloud. Okay, so if you're graduating from any of the colleges, and I'm not sure how much is a college syllabus is teaching you around cloud. Okay, but there are certain trainings and certification that you can complete externally. So to get started, there is a very basic foundation training and certification available from AWS. It's called Cloud Practitioner. So you can get started with that, probably complete a certification to get to know more and more AWS services. That's a foundation. And then the next is associate level certification. You have AWS Solution Architect Associate that you can complete. Okay, so these are very, very value added for your resume as well as for you to get into a cloud-based job, right? Again, don't do the certification just for the name of it. Okay, just to add a value to a certification, value to your resume, but try to understand logic behind it, what that service offers us, what is that you can use that service for, right? That really helps. I hope that answers the question.
Thanks, Venkatesh. If there are any more questions, feel free to type in the questions section. Venkatesh, if there are no more questions, I think we can conclude the section then.
Okay, thank you. Thank you
Okay.
everyone for joining into today's session. Feel free to connect with me on my LinkedIn or a Twitter. Right, I also have a YouTube channel that I have recently started. I'll try posting some of the easy ways to learn AWS over there. Or if you have any questions anytime about AWS or the cloud, always feel free to connect me on my LinkedIn or the Twitter. I'll be happy to help you, to get started your journey for cloud. Thanks again. Thank you everyone. Thank you, Suvarna.
Thanks, Venkatesh. It was really a great learning session for all of us. I hope all our attendees have got an idea about what is AWS EC2 and they have got answers of all their questions. And thank you all for attending the session. We appreciate your being with us today. Thanks. Have a great day.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.